All right, well, hi everybody, and welcome to our event on careers in psychology with a bachelor's degree. So we have always hosted a graduate school information night every fall, but in the alumni survey that we send out at the end of every spring semester, we've gotten some feedback that students would really like to see more on what you can actually do with a bachelor's degree, either because they want to maybe take a break before they go to graduate school, um, and work for a couple of years, or they want to just work with their degree. Obviously, we do both, right? We prepare you for graduate school, but we certainly also prepare you for careers right out of college. So this is what kind of inspired us to do this session. So I've prepared some slides, but like I said earlier, feel free to chime in at any time. If I say anything and you want to maybe ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions at any time. And then of course, we'll also have time for questions at the end. So I'm going to get right started. So first off, I wanted to tell you that you've made an excellent choice choosing psychology as your major or minor. Right? Any background in psychology will actually serve you really well throughout your career. And as you see, you're not alone in making that choice to study psychology. Psychology is actually quite a popular major throughout the US and even across the world. And right, even with the pandemic, I think the need to have more individuals that have a background in psychology has become even more highlighted. And certainly there's going to be a lot of job growth happening in the next couple of years. So I've looked up some statistics, and obviously, as you can see, there's been quite an increase in the number of students who choose psychology as their major in the last 2 decades. There were quite a few people that held a bachelor's degree. And as you can see, the employment rate is actually quite high. And certainly the return on investment for our UNE graduates is also quite high. And we see, depending on the year, somewhere between, I would say, a 95 to 100% of our graduates have a job right out of college, or they're enrolled in graduate school. So I think that's actually quite impressive and shows you that it's actually a really good choice of major. And it is a good choice because it really provides you with a skill set that prepares you for a variety of careers. And I'm just going to highlight a couple of things. Obviously, when we talk about choosing a major, you're going to do a little bit of both, right? Building, obviously, knowledge in the field of psychology by taking all the different classes like developmental psychology, social psychology, biological basis of behavior, cognition, and so forth. But also, you learn a lot of the soft skills that employers nowadays are looking for. So when we talk about soft skills, they basically are skills that you employ in everyday life, right? So knowledge base is, of course, something that is learned, and that is something that we teach you while you're in college. But the soft skills are something that will be with you forever. So some of those soft skills would be, thinking skills, obviously your presentation and language skills, right? How you can express yourself, synthesizing information. How do you look up information? How do you evaluate if a source is credible or not? Also, gaining some more experience with research methods and statistical skills is something that's really valued. And then also, last but not least, having strong interpersonal skills, right? Being able to work with other people in a team, or just being able to work with them and get along with them, is also something that's really valued by employers. And it is something that psychology prepares you for. So really, once you graduate with a bachelor's in psychology, you are a well-rounded individual, right? You're educated, but you've also acquired a lot of the soft skills that are really in high demand by employers. So you might be wondering, well, what is it that employers are actually looking for? So there's actually been some publications. Usually the American Psychological Association also puts out articles on this topic. And I have all the resources listed at the end of the presentation if you want to learn more about this. But I wanted to highlight some of these here. So some of the things that employers are really looking for in their hires, right? Surprisingly, actually, knowledge in the field isn't even here, but it's the soft skills that I was just talking about. So that's good interpersonal skills, being able to work with others, critical thinking skills, right? Being able to problem solve and figure out a solution, right? It's not always going to be a cookie cutter solution to every problem. Right? It might be presented to you in a different way than maybe you learned it in school, but you can problem solve and figure things out. Having really strong research and writing skills, but also presentation skills, I would say. And then of course, right, kind of falls into the category that I mentioned earlier, having some solid background and understanding of statistical analysis and scientific research, and being able to evaluate information based on credible sources, right? Looking to empirical research rather than anecdotal evidence to make your decisions. So I've also looked up some research on this topic, and this is a publication that came out in 2001 that also looked at, or there's actually two papers listed here, both coming out in 2001, really looking at the top 10 skills and abilities that employers are seeking. So I'm just going to give you a minute to take a look at this list, right? Some of them are repeats from what I said on the previous slide, but it's some of the same things, right? It's strong, work ethic. That one wasn't on the previous slide. Desire and ability to learn, but having that hunger to learn new information, because the truth is that we never stop learning. If I think about all the things that I've had to learn in the last 12 years in my career, right? It blows your mind, right? You never stop learning new skills. Having good problem solving skills, being able to communicate with your employer, with your colleagues, again, teamwork, being motivated and taking initiative, right? Those are really things that I also really value when I hire somebody for my lab, for instance. So yeah, take a look at this list and you'll see this is another publication that I've found. The list really goes on and on and on. When you look at the different articles that have been published, this was published in Ion Psychi, which is geared more towards undergraduate students. And this, again, was kind of the same theme, but it also asked what professors are valuing in their students. So you see a lot of overlap with previous slides. But you can also see that these are all skills that you are acquiring as part of your major. So I think that's really exciting. Okay, so let's kind of get to the good stuff, right? The things that you probably want to know, right? The presentation is about what can you do with a bachelor's degree in psychology. So I've broken this up into 4 sections. Typically, most recipients of a bachelor's degree in psychology will go in one of these 4 fields, but then there's certainly also an other category, right, where people pursue all kinds of different careers. But number 1 would be going into social services and healthcare. So maybe being in the counseling field, therapy, anything related to that. The second one would be going into the educational sector. So being a teacher or working in an educational setting in a different capacity. A third one would be business, right? That is maybe something that a lot of times people don't immediately think about, but it's actually a very lucrative field, right? You can work in marketing, data analysis, market research, things like that. There's some really great careers that you can have with a degree in psychology that are related to business. And then lastly, also some of our graduates and a lot of psychology majors overall in the country end up going into government, military, or law. So that could be going into, human resources. Some of our students go to law school, or they work on policy making. So yeah, all those areas are options really for what you can do with a degree in psychology. And one thing I will say, obviously, if you're studying nursing, right, you're going to become a nurse. So it's a little bit more straightforward. However, if you're majoring in psychology, right? The beauty of it is that you can do so many different things with it. But the flip side is that it can be overwhelming for students to figure out, like, where do I fit in? Maybe if counseling or healthcare isn't really your thing, right? It's important to recognize there's many different things that you can do with a bachelor's in psychology. Also, to give you an idea of how many people actually end up pursuing additional education. So a publication that came out in 2019 that looked kind of at a sample that was across the country in the US came up with this number, right? I'm sure it would probably, depending on where you're asking the questions and how this was sampled, would vary slightly. But approximately 43% of students who earn a bachelor's in psychology eventually go to graduate school, right? The flip side of that is that a good portion, right, 57%, do not go to graduate school, right? They pursue careers with their bachelor's in psychology. And then I also have it broken down here that some of those students who end up going to graduate school, right, some of them will end up pursuing a graduate degree in a field other than psychology, right? Like I mentioned, we've had some students go on to law school, for instance, or even medical school. And then, some, of course, go into careers within psychology. So they might go get a master's in counseling psychology, or they might earn a PhD in clinical psych or social psych or educational psychology. So yeah, there's many different options, right? We do a pretty good job preparing you for a variety of different graduate programs, but also preparing you for careers with your bachelor's. So how do you decide, right? How do you decide on what career is right for you? It's possible that you started declaring your major in psychology with a specific job idea or a dream career in mind, but it's also possible that, you just loved psychology and you're like, I want to study psychology, but you didn't quite have an idea of what you wanted to do with your degree when you're done. So where do you start, right? And always keep in mind that obviously the professional advisors and of course your faculty mentors and your professors, we're all here to help you figure this out. But some questions that you might want to ask yourself are the questions that I have here on the slide. So maybe think about, what are your passions or interests? Maybe you love doing art. And that might be something that you want to combine with your passion for psychology. You could also think about, what were your favorite classes that you've taken? I remember when I was an undergrad, when I took research methods, I just fell in love with research. So that really, helped me figure out what I wanted to do. But for you, it may have been, your social psychology class, or it may have been your community psychology class or sports psychology. You're like, oh my gosh, I love this, right? What careers are possible in that area? And like I said, it might already be that you have a specific field in mind, right? Some students come in and say, I want to do something with forensic psychology, or, I know I want to be a therapist, or I want to work in the mental health field. And maybe you have, met somebody else who has your dream job. And that, of course, can also be a source of inspiration. So those are kind of some of the things that I would suggest you think about to help you figure out, what is your passion, like what might be of interest for you for a career. Some other questions that you might want to consider once you've kind of maybe have a list of things that you're interested in. And sometimes students come to me and they're like, I have just so many interests and I just don't know which direction I should go in. So I think this is when maybe asking yourself these questions would come in really handy. And in general, I think you should always ask yourself these questions. Number one, let's say you have figured out what you wanted to do. You need to research and maybe find somebody who has that job, or maybe ask one of your professors, what degree is required for this dream job. And then next, I would ask myself, and do a little bit of research online, thinking about, can I see myself in this career long term, right? what are the work conditions, right? Am I going to be just sitting behind the desk, or am I going to be, doing different things? Is this job going to meet your social needs, right? Maybe you want to work from home, or maybe you don't want to work from home, right? Thinking about what's going to be the work environment. Is this kind of like a very, you're going to be like all the time by yourself, or are you going to interact with a lot of people and you would get a lot of enjoyment out of that? And prestige, basically, do you think you could be happy with that title, right? For some people, that doesn't matter at all. For others, right, maybe having recognition from other people might be important, right? Autonomy. Do you want to work in a job where you kind of get to dictate your own schedule, or maybe even pick the research that you're doing? Or are you okay with a supervisor telling you what to do and then just doing that and going home and being done with your job? Thinking about, and maybe finding somebody who has that job and asking them, what's your work-life balance look like? Do you have time for yourself? And then also maybe what social impact you have on the world, right? Sometimes students maybe want to go into social work, but then when you think about that, maybe the salary isn't going to be all that great. I tell them maybe look into policy making, for instance, because you still would have a really incredible and positive impact on the world and the people around you, but it would allow you to maybe do it in a different way, right? Contribute in a different way. That would also allow you to support yourself better. Think about, do you feel like this job is going to fulfill you, right? Especially thinking down the road, right? Some jobs can really burn you out quickly because of the type of work that you're doing. And then lastly, another thing to think about, is the job in line with your ethics, right? Think about, if you want to go into law enforcement, right? Even if you want to go into law, right? You might have to defend somebody that maybe isn't innocent. If you're working for HR, right? Your job is to protect the institution that you work for, or the company that you work for. Is that in line with your own ethics? So those are some important questions to ask yourself. And then related to that is, how much money will you be making, right? Really looking up median salaries, right? Depending on where you would be living. And obviously it's going to differ slightly, but thinking about, are you going to be able to support yourself with that salary? Are you going to be able to pay back any loans, right, in a reasonable amount of time, that you would be able to maybe eventually, buy a home, or, have a decent living? So just, those are some things that are, obviously you want to follow your passions, but those are some considerations that I think you should keep in mind, because you want to be able to support yourself, and that should not be the last thing you consider. Obviously, it's not all about money, but it is definitely something you want to keep in mind. And then also, I always recommend, right, maybe have a plan B, right? Let's say you want to be a clinical psychologist and you want to get your PhD. But then when you apply, you realize those programs are really competitive to get into. Would there maybe be another career that you could also be happy with? Or maybe if you can't get the PhD in clinical psychology, would you be happy with a master's in counseling psychology, where you could basically do the same work with maybe, some limitations, but nonetheless? Or thinking about, if this career plan doesn't pan out, what other options do I have? So having a plan C, maybe, or maybe a plan B, or even plan C might be a good idea. And then lastly, of course, you want to think about, okay, so now that I know what I want to do, what are the steps that I need to take to achieve that goal? So while you're still in college, maybe thinking about and researching possible grad schools, or if that's not something you want to do, thinking about, oh, maybe could I do an additional internship, or, maybe through your internship, you can start building a network of people in the field that could write recommendation letters, or that could put you in touch with other people that maybe have the dream job that you want. So yeah, those are all really things that you should ask yourself throughout your career as an undergrad. So speaking of money, I did find some data. As you can see, this is pretty outdated, right? This publication that I found was the newest that I could find in psychology. Is from 2000. So obviously bear that in mind as you're looking at these numbers, because they certainly have gone up. But this kind of just gives you an idea of, in relation to other jobs, how much do you approximately make in these different occupations. So I'm just going to give you a moment to kind of take this in and read through this. But please keep in mind that this obviously is 2 decades old. So the numbers have gone up, but I did want to put this up here just to give you an idea of what the different kinds of jobs actually make. All right, so I hope you had a chance to take a look at that. All right, so now I'm going against best practices in using PowerPoint, putting a lot of information on the slide. Now, I'm not expecting you to read through all of that. I'm going to be sharing the slides with you. And the reason why I put all of those titles on the slide and some upcoming slides as well is because they all contain job titles that degree holders of a bachelor in psychology have taken. So this is based on a publication that came out in 2018. And I thought it was really helpful because looking at these job titles, again, might give you some inspiration for, oh, I didn't realize like I could pursue that with a degree in psychology, but also they might come in really handy when you're going on a job search site, like Indeed, for instance, and you want to have different search terms, right? You can't just go on Indeed and say psychologist. That's not going to necessarily give you maybe ideas for what you can do with a degree in psychology. So instead, having some of those terms at your fingertips would be really interesting and helpful to maybe search for jobs that are available to people with a bachelor's in psychology. So I have this slide and I have this slide. This is a different publication that's a little bit older. But again, this I thought was really helpful because it categorized it by job titles related to psychology, related to business, and in other areas. I thought it was really interesting kind of to peruse these because obviously some of them are unexpected in the sense that, right, there's psychologist isn't in the title. So there's lots more that you can do. And again, this is a source of inspiration. And you could use this to type in search terms into Indeed, for instance. There's some more here. This is based on another publication. So this is categorized by psychology, human services area, and then also education, which the other publication did include. So I tried to include as many as possible. So later when I share these slides, you can look through these more carefully and find maybe some that interest you. This is also a word cloud that I found on the APA website that also has some job titles. But what I thought was kind of cool about this is that obviously the ones that are bigger are the ones that are more popular. So you kind of see that a larger number of psychology graduates are holding these types of jobs. And the smaller ones, of course, are people, there's fewer people that pursue these types of careers. But as what stands out is other management related occupations. So that seems to be something really popular for bachelors with psychology holders, social worker, counselor, etc. So yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting as well. All right, so knowing that a lot of our students are actually interested in pursuing a career as a psychologist or as therapist or counselor, I wanted to kind of say a few things about that because I know that there's obviously different jobs that you can pursue in that area. And interestingly enough, you can also, depending on the level of education that you can have different occupations. So I wanted to be clear that in order to be a licensed psychologist where you see clients and work with them one-on-one, you do have to have a degree, either a master's or a PhD. But that being said, there are many options in the mental health area where you can pursue a job with a bachelor's in psychology. So at minimum, you need to have a master's degree in counseling or social work with a clinical focus to become a therapist and work with patients one-on-one and provide therapy. Um, and typically what we see that master's level counselors often focus more on problems of living. So, maybe doing some career counseling or, working maybe with families to figure out family dynamics, doing counseling obviously for depression and anxiety, OCD, and even, helping individuals maybe with addiction problems, things like that. But the difference, or the primary difference between somebody with a master's and a PhD, is that the PhD is required if you want to do research or also pursue psychological assessment. So, oftentimes giving diagnoses. So doing the psychological assessment will require you to have a PhD. Having a PhD will also enable you to earn higher pay. And, typically you would have a more thorough understanding of, some of the psychiatric diagnoses that maybe you're, gaining through the psychological assessment. So there are some differences. However, it's perfectly fine, right, to have a master's in counseling. If you want to just do therapy and work with individuals, the master's is sufficient. The PhD really only makes sense if you want to do research or do something more than actually working with people in a therapy setting. That being said, right, so those are the careers that would require additional education upon graduation with a bachelor's in psychology. But my next slide is highlighting some of the careers that you can pursue in mental health, right? So related to counseling, that only require a bachelor's degree. And I think they're equally exciting. So that's definitely something to consider as well. So these are just some examples. That this is not an exhaustive list, but I just wanted to highlight 3 examples. So with a bachelor's in psychology, you could become and apply for jobs as a mental health tech. So a mental health tech typically performs a variety of different jobs that include a lot of direct patient care. So it's not just that you're indirectly involved, you actually work with patients throughout the day, helping them facilitate activities. You oftentimes can do intakes and assessments, sometimes assisting with medication administration. And typically these jobs can be found at hospitals or other settings where there's a lot of inpatients and more kind of intensive outpatient programs as well. So that certainly is something to consider. Another career to consider with a bachelor's in psychology, if you're interested in clinical work, would be working as a behavior analyst. Behavior analysts use principles of reinforcement and shaping to help individuals, typically with developmental disabilities and mental health concerns. And they're very targeted, right? They basically use principles of reinforcement to shape people, right? To either reduce a behavior or increase a certain behavior. So that can be done typically in outpatient clinics. Also, you see them in educational settings and also in other programming, such as, for instance, summer camps. Another option would be being a residential care worker, where you would be working at a residential treatment facility and provide direct care and help with a variety of different programming at a particular facility. So again, right, there's lots of different options out there of careers that you can pursue in mental health with a bachelor's. All right, so again, a little bit more information about what do you typically make with a bachelor's in psychology. So here are some examples. Again, these are not super new. So this is from 2019, but it can just give you an idea of how much you can typically make with the different careers that you can pursue, right? These are kind of examples that are not typically psychology or counseling related. And of course, this really also depends on, where you live in the country, right? Obviously, you would be making more money if you worked in Boston versus if you maybe live in, in Biddeford, Maine, right? Because cost of living, of course, is different and is less expensive here compared to Boston or New York or any other bigger city. At the bottom here, you can see, right, the 50th percentile for salary for psychology graduates with a bachelor's degree would be about roughly $50,000 a year. Keep in mind, this is from 2019. And then right there's the 25th percentile rank would be people making $36,000. And then if you're falling at the 75th percentile rank, it's 76. So it really depends on what field you go into. So that makes it all the more important that you really research your career in particular and see how much money making potential would you have in that particular career. All right, so now we're going to move on to what you can do as an undergrad to ensure that you're going to get your dream job by the time you're done. So some of the things that are just best practices in general when you're in college would be obviously trying to do your best, right? Nobody expects you to be perfect. You also want to keep in mind that, we're all humans and you want to obviously, make sure you're doing your best, but, don't expect that you always have to be perfect. You also want to make sure that you're building strong relationships with your professors and the staff, with career services, or all the other resources that are available on campus. Also, when you're choosing, obviously you've already chosen your major to be psychology, but when you're choosing maybe minors or concentrations, right, be mindful about how they could help you further your dream career, right? So if you're interested in mental health, declaring the MHR minor might be really useful. Or if you are interested in art therapy, right, you would have to get a master's degree to become an art therapist. But at least having the art therapy minor would at least allow you to dip your toe in and get a sense of what that's like. If you are planning on maybe having your own practice as a counselor one day, right, maybe declaring a business minor might be really smart. So you have some idea of what does it take to run a business. So in general, just choosing a minor, right? We have so many different minors at UNE. Choosing one that would support your job interests, of course, would be the smart thing to do. And then, of course, right, we offer lots of internship opportunities. All our psych students do an internship. Some do more than that. Some of our students also take advantage of the research opportunities in our program. So definitely take advantage of that. And then also participate in organizations like Psych-Chi or getting involved in Psych Club, right? Getting to know people and maybe getting to know your professors a little bit better. And then also, of course, make sure that you're using your professors as a resource, right? If you're taking a class and the content really excites you, talking to the professor would be really valuable. Taking advantage of, what they have to offer career services, right? They help you write your resume or CV. They help you with cover letters when you're applying for jobs. And the really nice thing about career services is that they're a lifelong service. So even if, 10 years after you graduate or 20 years after you graduate, you need somebody to help you write a new resume, they're there for you. So just keep that in mind. Another reason why you want to have good relationships with your professors is you might want to ask them for recommendation letters, either for graduate school or for jobs. Making sure that they actually know you and have good things to say about you would, of course, also be important. If UNE is offering any job fairs or programs like what we're doing today, by taking advantage of those can be really helpful. And I would encourage you, if you haven't already created your own resume, get started on a process. Again, career services, they're amazing and help students all the time working on their resumes. So if you haven't already, get started on that. And really don't wait until your senior year to get started talking about careers or thinking about that, because you, of course, want to make sure that you have time while you're in school to work on some of these things. So before I move on to talk about, what does the typical UNE alum actually look like, I did want to say um, that I want you to also think about that getting more education isn't always better. I think nowadays people sometimes feel obligated to get a master's or get a PhD. It just seems like the next thing that you have to do. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. Um, I'm telling you from experience, but I have been at UNE, this is my 12th year. And, I've seen enough generations of students come through and pursue careers, and having stayed in touch with them, it's not always the students that have 4.0s that find the most fulfilling careers. Some of the careers that some of the students with, getting a bachelor's in psychology have pursued, I'm just so happy when I hear about them, and they just seem so fulfilled and so happy in their careers. So I want you to really think about that and know that getting a graduate degree isn't going to be the answer to all your questions. So definitely keep that in mind. So just to give you an idea of what the typical UNE graduate looks like, when we send out the alumni survey, and please keep in mind that not 100% of the students answer those questions, but we get a good number of our students answering the questions, but just keep that in mind. So we typically see that about between 20 and 24% of the students that are taking the survey have already been accepted to graduate programs, either master's or PhD programs. And then, a good amount of students, even if they're not going to graduate school, so of the 80% that remain that are not enrolled in graduate school yet, of those 80%, 84% of those students are saying that they would like to maybe one day, or they're considering that they want to go to graduate school. And there's 16% of students that say right then and there, graduate school is not something that's in my future, and that's okay, right? And I want you to really feel like that is an acceptable choice, because there's some wonderful careers that you can pursue with a bachelor's. So some of the graduate school degrees that people have pursued, you can see right here. So kind of a mix of master's programs and PhDs. Like I said, we do a really good job preparing students and helping them actually get into those programs. And, as I mentioned earlier, we basically represent the full spectrum of all the jobs that you can pursue with a degree in psychology. So, many of our students obviously go into psychology, education, business, social services, healthcare, government, law, and other fields. And then I have some job titles of some alums that I've been keeping in touch with, and I just listed them. It's obviously not an exhaustive list, but I wanted you to see what some of our students are or have done and are doing still. And these are all job titles of individuals that, graduated a couple of years ago. And of course, I also wanted to include some more detailed information on some of our recent alums. So I'm just featuring a handful of people, some that I already had some information for. And these are all examples of people that are currently pursuing careers with their bachelor's in psychology. And I really try to be representative here and show you the full spectrum. So at the top left here, we have Nicole Martin. She just graduated in May. And she is currently holding a dual appointment at Spring Harbor Hospital in Westburg, Maine. And by the way, she actually did her internship there and then was hired right after she graduated. And she's currently working there as a research assistant for the Autism and Developmental Disorder Research Collaborative at Spring Harbor. And then she also works on one of the floors, and she's working as a behavior technician. And in particular, she works in the crisis unit for children with developmental disorders. And she's been very happy there. So she wants to go to graduate school eventually, but she's been loving her job, being more involved with research, but also being able to actually work on a floor with children, and that's her passion. And then Ellie Simon is a 2018 graduate, and she's been having an amazing career. She first started working as a research associate in Portland at a marketing company. Now she actually switched companies and is working as a senior researcher in marketing research. And yeah, she's having an amazing career. And they're actually, it's a very lucrative career, right? It pays really well, right? She's doing some market research at this firm. So yeah, just an amazing, amazing career that she's pursuing there. And there is no need for her to get any kind of graduate degree, because she just basically started as a research assistant and then worked her way up. And it's been working out really well for her. Eric Lederman is also a 2021 graduate. So he is currently pursuing training to become a police officer. He did his internship at the Saco PD here in Maine. And that is something that he wants to pursue as a career, also with his bachelor's in psych. Brianna Jewett graduated in 2020, and she just absolutely loves her job. So she is currently in New Hampshire, and she's working at a place called The Voice of Clay, and it's an art studio. And she is a teaching and studio assistant there, working with both children and adults who are neurodivergent. So she mentioned that she has once a week, she has a group of recovering addicts coming in and doing work with them. So they're doing work with clay and art things. So super cool. And she is so happy doing that job. So yeah, it's been really nice to kind of keep up with all of them and see what they're doing. And then down here we have Grace Bernatches, who's also a 2021 graduate. She returned to her hometown in Manchester, New Hampshire, and she's currently working there at the school that she went to as a substitute teacher and a paraprofessional. And if you're wondering what on earth is a paraprofessional is somebody that typically works in an educational setting, providing additional services to students that need them. So, if somebody needs extra help with math or extra help with reading or writing, they will pull those students out as part of their accommodations, and then they will get to work with a paraprofessional one-on-one to basically catch up to the class level. And then last but not least, we have Ellie Layton here. She's a 2019 graduate, and she is so she worked as an educational technician and also as a behavioral health professional at Watch Me Shine, also working with children, so working in an educational setting, but focused on also counseling, and so kind of doing school psychology work. And she's also actually in graduate school part-time right now, so working and also pursuing a degree in school psychology. All right, so this is it from me. I'm gonna stop sharing the slides and go to the full screen so I can see you guys, and then I would be happy to take any questions that you guys have. But before we do that, I also wanted to give a special thank you to Aubrey, Gracie, Emily, and Haley, and all the other folks who've been involved in helping us organize this event. But these individuals in particular helped me put together the slides and did some additional research, putting in some newer resources. So I wanted to give them a special shout out and say thank you to them. All right, so I'm going to stop my slides right here and open up the floor for questions.
If somebody is thinking of pursuing a graduate degree, but they don't want to do it quite yet, say they want to take a year or two off to work, do you think that they should try to look for jobs that are going to replicate what they might be doing in grad school, or do you suggest they diversify, find out what they like, don't like?
That is an excellent question. So I think there's kind of two sides to that. Obviously, I would assume that somebody who has had 4 years in college, they've already had a chance to maybe dip their toe into different things by doing different internships. And I think really the goal of the internships is twofold, right? I guess like ideally you would want to pursue an internship and find that that's your passion, right? But there's certainly also the internships where you try something out that you thought you would love, and you're realizing man, this is not what I expected it to be. And this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. And you know what? I think that's just as valuable, because I think that will help you figure out that that's not what you want to do. And then you can kind of shift gears and do something else. Um, so assuming that you've already had the opportunity to kind of try out different things, I would suggest, to prepare yourself better for graduate school, I would try to get into an area that would, basically supplement your application and strengthen your application and your resume or CV. So let's say you want to go to graduate school, let's say you want to go to graduate school in clinical psychology, which is very competitive. So I would suggest seeking out a research assistant opportunity. So I'm thinking of Benjamin Katz, who graduated, I believe, in 2017. So he actually went on and took on a research assistant position at a different institution. I think he did that for 2 years, and he was able to really gain more experience. He was actually able to do research and publish while he was there, and that allowed him to really strengthen his application for clinical programs. And then he was accepted into a clinical PhD program where he is right now. So I feel like in that instance, definitely you want to pursue a job that would help you strengthen your application because you're in that field. I mean, in general, obviously there's nothing wrong with serving tables or working in retail because you need to make money, but ideally you want to find yourself a job that will help you on your resume apply for other jobs, right? Where you're actually gaining experience in the field. It's no matter how small the position is, I would say that, if you can associate yourself with a hospital or a facility that has a recognizable name, that would look better than, working at, a retail store, for instance. So yeah, I would definitely say, try to find a job that would allow you to gain more experience in the field that you want to go to graduate school in, to either figure out if that's really your passion and or to gain more experience in that field and strengthen your application. Yeah, great question. Anybody else have any questions?
Do you know anything about like the difference between a PsyD degree compared to like a PhD degree?
I had a hard time hearing. I didn't quite understand what you said. Is the difference between what kind of degrees?
A PsyD doctorate degree compared to a PhD.
Were you asking the difference between a PsyD and a PhD?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry that sounded really jumbled, but I'm glad you were able to understand it. Okay, yes, absolutely. I would be happy to talk about that. So the difference between a PsyD and a PhD would be that the PhD should be pursued if you want to go into research or academia or counseling. The PsyD is a little bit more limiting because it's more applied. PsyD programs very rarely will involve research. So I would say the hierarchy is that the PhD would be preferred, but like I said, they're also very competitive. PhDs usually also, you get a tuition remission, you get a stipend, so you're gonna save a lot of money, but it's more research focused. So let's say that you wanna, as I mentioned earlier, maybe you do want to be eligible for higher pay, or you wanna do some of the clinical assessment that I mentioned earlier. Then maybe a PsyD would be appropriate. But I will say there's a big caveat, because I usually don't advise students to pursue the PsyD because it's so expensive. There's a lot of programs out there that are just money makers for institutions, because the PsyD is a program that will be fully paid for by the student. So the admission standards are a little bit lower, but you're paying out of pocket. And I know Dr. Long always says you will basically owe 2 Ferraris worth of money when you graduate with a PsyD. Now, I don't exactly know how much Ferraris are, but I'm just going to say it's a lot of money that you will owe on top of maybe any undergraduate debt that you already have. So I would only suggest that you pursue the PsyD if maybe you weren't able to get into a PhD clinical program, and or you feel extremely passionate about doing applied work, but you do want to have that doctorate. Most of the time, if you want to actually do applied work, if you want to do counseling, go for the master's in counseling. If you want to do research, do the PhD in clinical counseling. Yeah, I feel like it's a lot of money that you would pay out of pocket to get a PsyD, but yeah, that's the primary difference. So the PsyD would allow you to, earn more money, do assessment, but it wouldn't allow you to do research. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, Caitlin.
It did, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, any other questions? Aubrey, maybe we can stop recording, and then, if anybody maybe wants to off the record have another question, we can do that.
Sure thing. I'll go ahead and end it here.